I hope your death was long and painful. Just before we start this one, I will say that pretty much everything that I know about Pan Am, I know from the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio, and he made it look pretty cool. He made being a pilot look pretty cool. Also, no one told me when I was at school, did I mention this in a business place before? I recently read an article about how much pilots make. And I was like, no one at school, I went to the careers counselor when I was a kid and I was like, yeah, I just like a job that pays me lots of money. And they were like, well, go into business, son. And I was like, okay. So I went and did a business degree. That worked out great. No one was like, be a pilot. And I was like, I could have been a pilot. Why not? They make loads of money. Hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's crazy. But anyway, everything I know about Pan Am, I know from Leonardo DiCaprio. He made it look pretty cool. Although, to be fair, Leonardo DiCaprio could make Raid Shadow Legends look cool, so there is that. Danny writes these scripts, I read them. My name is Simon. You probably know that. Welcome to Business Blaze.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Any of us who have ever had a proper job might recall the odd day or two when you turned up for work, as usual, but ended up going home much earlier than you had expected. I don't necessarily mean that time you sliced off the end of your finger during a careless moment with the paper guillotine and get rushed to hospital. Poor Danny. I assume that happened to Danny. It didn't happen to me. I mean those moments when exceptional circumstances beyond anyone's control leads to the closing down of the whole workplace without much warning. Here in the UK, it's usually something to do with the weather. Yeah, as soon as it snows in the UK, everyone's like, well, I guess I can't go to work. Everyone forgets how to drive as soon as it snows. And also, I'm not sure if this is true, but snow plows in the UK are not really a thing. Like, they'll grit the roads and they'll put salt down like the main roads, but like plowing the snow off it isn't a thing because it snows so, heavily, so rarely that it's just not economically worthwhile having snow plows and snow plowists doing the work, so they just don't bother, and then it's like, oh yeah, no one can go to work today. Used to pray for those days. Used to pray for the days where it would be so snowy you couldn't go to school. It maybe happened once. Ever. It was awesome. Many years ago, I used to work for the Royal Bank of Scotland, but please don't judge me for that. Oh, really? I think I've mentioned before a friend of mine works at the Royal Bank of Scotland, or at least I'm not sure if he does anymore, but it was basically bought by the taxpayer. I mentioned this before for sure, and we just used to make fun of him that he worked for us. I wasn't involved in banking or anything. In fact, I'm not sure what I did. I just used to turn up, and nobody seemed to mind me being there. But we often used to get sent home early if the weather was behaving in a slightly unusual manner. The whole country would grind to a halt at the first sign of a snowfall, indeed, or if it had just started to rain quite heavily. The only problem was that you were really screwed for getting home if you relied on public transport because all the buses and trains had stopped running too. Yeah, I remember once I was in London and I wanted to go home and it had just started snowing like crazy heavy. And I'm on the train and they're just like, yeah, we just can't go any further. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, well, I obviously didn't ask, but the PA system comes on. And it's like, so we're going to go to the next station and drop you off. And we'll try and arrange some other form of transport for you. It's like, okay. It's like 9 o'clock at night. I did not get home. It was 45 minutes supposed to be on the train home from London. I did not get home until 7 o'clock the next morning. It was brilliant. I can remember during one particularly bad flood in 2008, it took me about 3 hours to wade home on foot, ended up losing a fight with a herd of swans who had taken over a local pedestrian crossing. Oh my god. Fuck you think you're fucking with, I'm the fucking boss. Danny is like the most unlucky person. The morning of the 4th of December 1991 was one of those funny days for the last remaining, oh yeah, we're doing a video about Pan Am. Business Blaze, Daddy's life stories. For the last remaining 7,500 employees of Pan American World Airways, many of whom turned up for work at the usual time for what would prove to be their last ever shift, and probably one of the shortest shifts that they would ever work in their lives. Within the space of just an hour, the 64-year-old airline closed down forever with immediate effect. All employees were ordered to just leave the site, in many cases abandoning stranded passengers waiting at gates for planes that would never land. That's brutal. Can you imagine you're just going on holiday and it's like, yeah. I don't say I need to imagine this. I was once on a trip to America and I got an email one day, it's just like on holiday, and it's like, we're really sorry, but we've got into administration, so you'll need to book another flight home. And I'm like, oh, thanks. I can't even remember what the airline was called, but it was really shit. The flight was really cheap, which is probably why they went out of business. There was no merger, no takeover, no long-winded legal wrangling. The world's most famous and most pioneering airline, which helped define the air travel industry that we know today, I'm glad Danny didn't say love, had just disappeared into the Bermuda Triangle with barely a wave goodbye. And just to be clear, not all of their planes crashed in the Bermuda Triangle. Fun fact, the Bermuda Triangle is totally not even a thing. It's just a fictional made-up thing that doesn't actually exist. There are no more plane crashes in the alleged Bermuda Triangle. Smash that dislike button, conspiracy theorists. Because you know what else happened? People definitely landed on the moon, and 9/11 was definitely not an inside job. Smash that dislike button! So how did such a cultural icon of the golden age of air travel end up dramatically running out of fuel? Well, it didn't have much to do with the weather or cocky swans. Ba-da-bum-bum. And although the demise of the airline most commonly known as Pan Am may have seemed sudden to some, it was a downfall that was nearly 20 years in the making. The airline was founded in 1927 by a team of aviation aces led by American entrepreneur Juan Trippe, although back then it was just a shell company with no planes, no assets, and no employees. Were these really aviation aces? Isn't like an ace a specific thing in aviation, like someone who shoots down planes? Essentially, it was little more than an idea on a beer mat with a few quid in the bank for startup capital. Yet, little more than a few months later, Pan Am had already got off the ground with its very first flight in a Fairchild FC-2 float plane. A float plane's one that lands on a lake, right? I'd love one of those. That would be awesome. Because my assumption is you can just go land on any body of water anywhere, right? I assume that's totally not true, or everyone would just be having float planes instead of actual planes. Back in those days, the name Pan Am perfectly described the initially quite simple ambitions of the new airline. The original goal wasn't anything to do with international commercial travel. It was just about hauling mail between America and the Panama Canal Zone, which was then still under US colonial control. In fact, the whole concept was largely just a retaliatory move against the Germans, who had been planning something similar. Fearing that the Germans were seeking political influence in the Canal Zone, the US government lent a strong helping hand to ensure that Pan Am became the first company to create air links between the US and Latin America. Within the space of just a year, in fact, isn't it a rule that foreign operators can't, I guess maybe it wasn't back then, it's a super interesting one, if it's correct, not sure, speaking from my memory here, which might just be a made-up fact, that a foreign aircraft company like Virgin or BA or Qatar or one of these can't fly domestic flights in the US. I think that's against the rules. And I guess this would be a domestic flight because if Panama was, that was a little enclave of the United States in Panama, the Panama Canal area. So I guess that would kind of fit under those rules. Within the space of just a year, Pan Am had expanded its horizons to offer commercial passenger services from Florida to Cuba, and one of the big reasons that this took off so quickly is because Americans were so desperate to get smashed. Okay. Bear in mind that most American citizens were still suffering from the effects of having to be stone cold sober under the 13-year era of prohibition, and so Pan Am's marketing campaign invited potential passengers to fly away and drink rum in the sun in Cuba, and it certainly hit the spot. You bet it did. It's like, you can't drink at home. It's like, well, I guess we're going to Cuba every night. Those poor Americans were so bloody desperate for a bloody drink that they probably would have made do with even a can of Heineken at that point. If you get that joke, you're an OG Business Blaze legend. Thank you. If you're not, well, I'm not going to tell you what video it is. You'll just have to go back and watch every single one of it was the Heineken video. I just imagine if they tried prohibition in the UK, like an American style, let's just outlaw alcohol in the UK. I do think that is the thing that would finally get us, because we don't have a constitution, we have a monarchy. I do truly, you can have a constitution and a monarchy at the same time, like a constitutional monarchy, but I do think that this would be the final tipping point that would get us a constitution and get rid of the monarchy, because people would go apeshit. There'd be a revolution. By the 1930s, Pan Am was expanding its horizons even further, providing new international routes for the very first time and leading the way in making the world a smaller place. Not every international destination had a proper concrete runway in those early days of aviation, but Pan Am got around this problem by operating a fleet of flying boats, most commonly known as clippers, which could land the aircraft on water instead and sail the passengers to shore. This is so cool. Anyone who's into aviation is always, obviously this doesn't work, Simon, but I'm like, why can't we just land all our planes on lakes? Like, why? Everyone's, we got to build like another runway at Heathrow. God forbid we have 2, 3. It's like, why not just land all the planes at sea and take people in by boat? Sure, it's more complicated than that, but that'd be awesome. Just land them on the Thames. You don't need city airports, just land them in the river. Imagine a mother A380. These could land on water instead, and the passengers would sail to the shore. There was the inspiration behind the sea captain design of early Pan Am uniforms, and explains why today most aviation uniforms have more than a whiff of the Navy look about them. Wow, I didn't even know that. Except, of course, for Ryanair, who I believe have now resorted to just running clown costumes. Probably it's cheaper. Over the course of the next few decades, Pan Am went on to become the founding member of the International Air Transport Association and blazed a pioneering path for today's international commercial flight industry. Although they didn't bother with any of that small fry domestic flight nonsense, Pan Am evolved into the first airline that could pretty much get you all the way around the world. Well, except Antarctica, but nobody really wants to go to Antarctica anyway. They haven't even got a Taco Bell there yet. Oh my god, the comments on like, Simon, it's taco. And I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, it might be in America. Guess where I'm not from? Taco Bell. You really want me to speak American the whole time? Do you really? My American accent is not very good. In 1958, they became the first airline to embrace the jet age. You gotta get all southern. In 1958, they became the first airline to embrace the jet age as the Pan Am Boeing 707 made its maiden commercial voyage from New York to Paris in just 8 hours, marking the beginning of a close relationship between Pan Am and the US aircraft manufacturer Boeing. 8 years later, Pan Am CEO Juan Trippe met with Boeing CEO Bill Allen for a particularly fruitful fishing trip in Alaska, during which the world's first jumbo jet was effectively put into production. I feel business meetings were cooler in the day. I bet they were smoking cigars and fishing giant fish in Alaska. Today it's like, yeah, I got a business meeting. It's like, if we could crush it down into 20 minutes on Skype, that would be great. By the end of this fishing trip, Bill Allen had landed a pink salmon, a Pacific halibut, a yellowfish rockeye, probably, and a $525 million order to build the Boeing 747 for Pan Am. I didn't know the 747 was built for Pan Am. That's super cool. Also, the Boeing 747 has been around 1958? No, 8 years later, so 1966? 747 has been around forever. If you guys wanted, there's a great channel where a Boeing 747 pilot breaks down like movie scenes with planes, and it's just like, yeah, that's not real, that's not real, that's definitely not real, not real, not real, that's real, not real, not real, not real. It's brutal. It's called 747 Crew. Worth subscribing to. I might link to it below if I remember. Maybe it's a Rickroll. Search for it. I'm not your secretary. One Trippe reportedly told Bill, if you build it, I'll buy it. And Bill responded with, if you buy it, I'll build it. So Bill built it and Juan bought it. Fascinating. In 1964, Pan Am also became the world's first airline to introduce a computerized reservation system, la-di-da, in collaboration with IBM. Wow, this is all a blast. I know IBM still exists, but it's like, I feel like IBM, did they matter more in the past? Because it's been a long time since, I've had any interaction with an international business machine. Pan Am commissioned the installation of the Panamac computer system in their swanky head office in Midtown Manhattan. These days, you could probably achieve similar results with an app on your phone, but back in the 1960s, the innovative Panamac computer took up the entire 4th floor of the building. I bet your phone can do a ton more. Still, they had plenty of room. The head office in question was a $100 million skyscraper called the Pan Am Building, which had 59 stories. That's cool. It's worth it when your company has its own skyscraper. It's like, yeah. And I was incredibly disappointed recently, a couple of years ago. You see those big skyscrapers and they say like, XYZ Bank on the side or XYZ Law Firm. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. But no, they just have the naming rights, because you go into one of those buildings and you see like behind the reception, it's like, so who are these other companies? And why is this company only on floors like 37 and 38? And it's like, because they rent the naming rights to the building. So it just looks really awesome to people who, don't have any interaction with big law firms, but it makes you look powerful. So I guess when someone threatens to sue me and I'm like, oh my god, I've heard of them, it's like, It's worth remembering that Pan Am flights of the 1960s and 70s were very different experiences than the typical flight today. This was the era of decadence. You'd fly in the lap of luxury and would often dress for the occasion in suits and evening dresses. The college-educated and multilingual stewardesses would bring steak, champagne, and caviar to your lavish cabin. This was pretty much what a Ryanair flight would look like if you stepped into a mirror universe where everything was the exact opposite. Without a doubt, this was truly the golden age of aviation, and Pan Am was right there at the very heart of it. And this is interesting. It's one of those like internet memes. You look online and you see like, oh, well, flying was so much better in the past, and there's a picture of like a woman carving like a giant roast by a seat with like this much legroom. And everyone's like, wow, it was so much better. It's like, yeah, because it was 10 times more expensive. If you want something like that, fly first class. It's 10 times more expensive. There you go, problem solved. Without a doubt, this was truly the golden age of aviation, and Pan Am was right at the heart of it. By 1970, Pan Am was flying 11 million passengers over 20 billion miles across 86 countries. This seemed like the perfect time for Pan Am to invest another $500 million into a huge fleet of shiny new Boeing 747 jetliners. But the airline couldn't have foreseen what was waiting for them just around the corner. This has got to be the 1970s, right? Was the oil crisis? Epic. I'm so smart. It was the 1973 energy crisis. Oil crisis, energy crisis, whatever. Oil suddenly became incredibly hard to come by, and this naturally sent fuel prices rocketing to unprecedented heights, creating huge financial problems for a company like Pan Am, who accordingly put up their ticket prices. However, the energy crisis was merely the tip of a much bigger iceberg, which led to a 2-year recession period for most of the Western world. So while Pan Am was forced to increase their prices because of their dramatically increased operating costs, demands for international travel was naturally dropping anyway during a financially difficult period for anyone. Nobody could afford this extravagant anymore. Pan Am had been left with a huge new fleet of expensive jumbo jets which were just taking to the skies with barely anybody on board. By 1976, Pan Am was estimated to be $500 million in debt. This is all rather appropriate because this is happening at a time where I think it was it BA or one of the big American airlines was like, yeah, we need 12 billion pounds in money from the government just to knock her out of business. That'd be great. It'll be really interesting to see, watch this video in the future. If you're watching this video in future, I'm very curious. I mean, I'm sure they get bailed out, right? Most of them are gonna get bailed out by the government and they'll be fine. But I wonder how many, how many airlines are gonna go out of business. It's early 2020. No one's flying anywhere. But it gets worse. The new Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 opened the door to new competitors while only fueling further problems for poor old Pan Am. Up to this, stupid regulations making everything safe. Up until this point, the airline industry was largely regulated by the government, who even decided the routes and the cost of a ticket. Oh wow, that's a bit intense. This isn't just a safety thing?
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
But the new act freed up competitors to fly on their own wings of glory and offer cheaper alternatives to the high-end luxury flights of Pan Am, which now suddenly seemed an incredibly expensive option. Stupid competition, ruining my business! But maybe there was a glimmer of hope for Pan Am with the new Deregulation Act. In the past, Pan Am had continually been refused permission to operate a network of domestic flights, while their smaller competitors had been allowed by regulators to establish such crucial networks. This is what's the point of this regulation? It's good it seems pretty smart they deregulated this, because why? Come on, America, you're better than this. You're like the anti-regulation kings. And I like you for it. Mostly. Some shit is crazy. This seems too far. The fear had always been that Pan Am would use their vast clout to crush smaller competitors, but the new Deregulation Act meant that they were now free to pursue domestic options for some time. They certainly felt as if they had to do something. I feel like it didn't crush the competitors. I mean, just look at Europe. There are tons of small, big airlines operating small flights at incredibly low costs. It's really awesome. I mean, it's horrible for the environment, but it's pretty great that I can fly to London to Prague for it's like £30-40 return. They certainly felt as if they had to do something. By now, a ticket consisting of a domestic leg on a rival airline with an international leg on Pan Am would work out much more expensive than a ticket that just cut out Pan Am altogether. And that's exactly what customers started doing. Pan Am's response to this was to acquire the domestic operator National Airlines in 1980, but it didn't come cheap. Following a furious bidding war, they eventually seized hold of it for $437 million, which is a lot more $1 million today. But it didn't solve the problem at all. The whole acquisition was a bit of a muddled mismatch between two very different companies and cultures. The airlines had incompatible aircraft, the integration of the two companies was very poorly handled, and Pan Am continued to struggle to compete with new emerging airlines. It was another very expensive purchase on the balance sheet, which hadn't been paid off. Things were getting so bad that Pan Am were forced to spend most of the 1980s selling off all kinds of crazy shit. That big, nice, oh no, that 59-story skyscraper that had housed the mighty Panamac computer was sold for $400 million. It now goes under the name the MetLife Building, and it's one of the largest commercial office spaces by square footage. The company also resorted to selling off some of the most profitable routes and subsidiaries, raising hundreds of millions of dollars in the process, but it wasn't enough to stem the negative cash flow. On top of all of this, customer confidence in Pan Am flights had taken a battering in the 1980s following the 1986 hijacking of Pan Am Flight 73 in Pakistan, resulting in 21 deaths, and the 1988 terrorist bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 above Lockerbie in Scotland, which killed all 259 people on board and 11 citizens of the local community. And by the way, the dude who was arrested for this, I believe this is correct. He was imprisoned for life, obviously, in Scotland. I gotta look this up, because it's the most absurd ever. Okay, so just for some context, if you're not familiar with the Lockerbie bombing, which, is pretty famous, at least in the UK, 259 people were killed. So this dude called Megrahi, he was basically responsible. He was this Libyan dude, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment on 270 counts of murder. And he was imprisoned in Scotland. The other defendant was found not guilty. They appealed it. Obviously, 270 counts of murder, you're going to prison forever. Except he didn't go to prison forever. Get this. In 2009, Megrahi appealed to be released from jail on compassionate grounds. 3 weeks later, on the 12th of August 2009, he applied to have his second appeal dropped and was granted compassionate release for his terminal prostate cancer. Which, even if he was going to die next week, I'd be like, you. You deserve to die in prison, you absolute dickhead. Get this. So he returns to Libya, and they'd given him an approximate 3-month prognosis on his prostate cancer. Great, I wish it was shorter. And he was given a combination of drugs that extends the survival rate by 14.8 months, median. This motherfucker didn't die for 3 years. And it's just like, compassionate release. Like, Scotland, are you kidding me? They should have just shot him. It's like, yeah, I want compassionate release. I know I killed 270 people. But I'd really like to go home and spend my last months, which turns out to be 3 years, with my family. Megrahi. I remember this coming out and I was like, this is actually absurd. I hope your death was long and painful. Perhaps the final nail in the coffin was the Gulf War in 1990, which not only caused a further spike in oil prices, but also sent demands for international travel plummeting to new depths. By November 1991, Pan Am found itself in a position where it needed $25 million just to keep on operating for the week ahead. They had come close to persuading a US bankruptcy judge that a life-saving deal with Trans World Airlines was imminent. Is that Howard Hughes' company? I think it was, right? Not sure. TWA, sounds right. But the deal never happened, possibly because Trans World Airlines had noticed that Pan Am was now losing $3 million a day every day it opened for business. It's like, that looks like a great acquisition. Oh, you're losing $3 million a day? Never mind. On the morning of the 4th of December 1991, after many employees had only just turned up for work, the Pan Am CEO delivered a message to everyone in head office, which was simple and blunt: shut it down. Delta Airlines spent $416 million on acquiring the spoils of the collapse, including the aircraft, the European network, and the Terminal 3 Worldport at New York JFK Airport. Surprisingly, the Pan Am brand is still alive and kicking today. Wow. But it has nothing to do with commercial flights. Not surprisingly, the name and iconic blue meatball logo was picked up by Guilford Railways, a Class 2 regional railroad covering northern New England in the US. Why? God knows why they bought the name. You can only assume it was going fairly cheap. I'd love to buy something like this. I wonder how much that was, because, I don't know, it'd be really cool to own like Pan Am's logo. I have no idea why. I guess I'd sell Pan Am merch. And it's a shame that the name didn't end up getting attached to something a little more exciting and relevant, like maybe a fancy hot air balloon service that served oysters and sparkling wine halfway through the trip. That sounds pretty awesome. Looking back now at the ascent and descent of the most famous airline in the world, you can't help feeling that much of the downfall can be blamed on sheer rotten bad luck. Of course, they made some bad decisions. Desperately flogging everything they had of value when things turned bad was never likely to bode well for the future, and the costly acquisition of National Airways could have been handled better. But it could also be argued that things may have turned out very differently if regulators had allowed them to operate domestic flights much earlier, instead of thwarting the company at every turn. The $500 million purchase of a new fleet of Boeing 747 jetliners in the 1970s was a shrewd move at the time, but the company could never have foreseen the looming energy crisis that would drive the passengers away from international travel for the rest of the decade. And of course, you can't blame Pan Am for the terrorist hijackings, bombings, or the Gulf War. They were held culpable for implementing inadequate security measures during the Lockerbie bombing, but it seems a little harsh, as they were simply implementing the exact same security measures as every other airline in the world. Yes, let's just all blame the actual dude dude who blew up the plane. Just like those adverse weather conditions that sent everyone in the UK out onto the streets to wrestle with pompous swans, the downfall of Pan Am was largely out of the company's control. Bogus fact, and yes, I did say bogus. One of the company's most mysterious flights was Pan Am Flight 914, which took off from New York in 1955 with 57 passengers on board. It then disappeared for 37 years before landing safely in Miami in 1992 with all the crew and passengers safely intact. That amazing story ran on the front page of the US tabloid Weekly World News, and if it sounds like a plotline ripped off from an early Twilight Zone episode, that's probably because it was a plotline ripped off from an early Twilight Zone episode. The story was completely fake, but Weekly World News had a bit of a habit of bending the truth. Bending the truth? It's a total fiction. A little more to create an exciting front page. But if people want news, they're not going to buy that then. Over the years, they also claimed that Elvis Presley was alive and well, the original apple from the Garden of Eden had been uncovered, and a news reporter had been eaten alive by an 80-foot dinosaur. So like the original Onion. This has been Business Blaze. Thank you for watching to the end. If you did, you're a legend. Thank you. Like, subscribe. My YouTube shilling is done. Thank you for watching.